This presentation is to help you complete Around the World in 25 Days, the 7th grade math week 2. The level 1 problem says you will spend between $800 and $1,200 while in Dallas. Figure out how much you would have for each of the categories below. Your budget should be 10% food, 40% lodging, 30% transportation, 5% gifts, and 15% activities. I would say there are two main ways that you could approach this problem. The first way, and the way that's a little bit easier, is decide the total that you want to spend. So one way you could complete this problem is by choosing an amount of money between $800 and $1,200, then find the percent of the total budget for each category. Another way that you could do this is by starting with how much you want to spend on a category. So you could also start with an amount that you want to spend for one category and work from there. This could result in a total that is outside of the $800 to $1,200 range. So you may have to adjust and try again. If you try this method and get frustrated, I would suggest going back and deciding on the total that you want to spend first, and then finding your percent of that total. The starting with a category, which is the second one that I discussed, this is going to be a little bit of a guess and check. For instance, if you started saying that you wanted to spend like $500 on food, that's probably going to make it way outside of your $800 to $1,200 range. So just something to consider. Or if you started with too little for a category, it's going to result in something less than $800. So something to consider if you choose to start with a category amount first. Remember that these are percent problems, and we had two ways that we discussed this year of using percents. So you can use the percent proportion, which is part over whole equals percent over 100. So we already know our percentages. They're given to us in the problem. The part would be the amount of money spent on whatever category you're talking about or trying to find. And then the whole would be the entire budget, which is supposed to be between $800 and $1,200. The percent equation is when you have the part, which is equal to the percent times the whole amount. In the context of your problem, part would be the amount of money for each category, and whole would be the total budget. Remember, if you're using the percent equation, you have to change the percent to a decimal. Like 10% would actually be 0.1 or 1/10. If you're using the percent proportion and you were talking about 10%, you would just put 10 over 100 and solve the problem from there. If you decide to do level 2, this will help you out. Level 2 says to make a circle graph to display your spending. You can create this on paper or online using the same budget that was 10% food, 40% lodging, 30% transportation, 5% gifts, and 15% activities. The basics of a circle graph, first of all, it's a circle. You do need to know the center point of your circle. So if you're having to do this by hand, you're going to do your best drawing a circle, and you're going to do your best putting a point in the very middle. We know that there's going to be some room for error, and it's not going to be perfect, and that's just fine. A circle graph also has central angles that create sectors of our circle. So this central angle right here creates this whole sector of our circle graph. If you notice, this would be the largest sector of our circle, which means this angle would be the largest central angle. This is the smallest, and then I would say this is the next largest, and this one's in the middle. These two are in the middle. But the sectors are going to correspond with the percentages, and the larger the percent, the larger the sector is going to be. The smaller the percent of your data, the smaller the sector is going to be. Creating a circle graph, no matter how you create your circle graph, which we're going to talk about here in a second, you'll need to do the math to determine the central angle measure for each sector. The sectors of the circle graph are proportional to the percent of data they represent. So for instance, a sector representing 10% of your data would be half the size of a sector represent 20% of your data. 50% of your data would be half the circle. So this is going to be a proportional relationship. When you're finding central angle measures, a whole circle measures 360 degrees. And to find the central angle measure of each sector or piece of data, you're going to find that percent of 360. So for instance, if I had a piece of data that was 20% of the total data collected, I would need to find 20% of 360, and I can do that by changing my percent to a decimal. So 20% becomes 0.2 times 360, the whole circle. Well, 0.2 times 360 is 72. So that tells me that my central angle that I measure is going to have a 72-degree angle to represent 20% of the circle. For 35%, you would again change it to a decimal, which is going to be 0.35, multiply it by the whole 360 every time. And 0.35 or 35% times 360 tells me my central angle should be 126 degrees. You're going to have 4 options for creating a circle graph. Your first option that we would be doing in school if we had school would be using a protractor, and that's going to be on the next slide as a video. We also gave you access to a printable sheet found on our websites, and there's a video to help you out with that one as well. It actually does use percentages because it takes a circle and breaks it into 100 pieces. You can also draw a circle on if you don't have a printer, you can draw a circle on a piece of paper and you can make your best guess. If you have a protractor, you could use the protractor. If you don't, you can kind of mark where 50% would be and so forth, and kind of go from there. And then your fourth option is to create one using technology to the best of your ability. So whatever you want to do, you can try one of these options. And remember, level 2 is optional, and you can make your best guess using a piece of scratch paper. Please do not get out and go buy something. You don't have to have a protractor at all, so don't go get a protractor if you don't have one. This video is going to explain how to use a protractor to solve the problem. Circle graph using a protractor, which I have here. You need to remember a couple of things about the protractor first. First of all, our center of the circle is going to line up with this target right here. There's lines, this one's a little bit faded. There's lines that you're going to need to line up with the lines of your sector, which I'll show you here in just a second. And then the other thing I wanted to remind you of is when you're measuring angles with a protractor, there's always 2 numbers. One for the acute angle and one for the obtuse supplementary angle. So, and I'll show you a little bit as we go as well. So I made up this data, but this is the favorite ice cream of people. And I said that 20% like vanilla, 35% like chocolate, and 45% like other. So if I'm using a protractor, I don't need percentages. I need degrees in order to measure. So what I would do is I'm going to find 20% of the whole circle, which is 360 degrees. So 20% of 360, we actually already did previously in this presentation, but 20% of 360 is 72 degrees. We also already did 35% of 360, which was 126 degrees. And then 45% liked other, and that's going to be the rest of the circle, which is 162 degrees. So with these are going to tell me the angles of the central angle so that my sectors are proportional to 20%, 35%, and 45% of this entire circle. So to do this using a protractor, and remember there's 3 or 4 different ways that we're going to talk about. A protractor, you're going to draw a line using a straight edge. So this has kind of a built-in ruler down here. So just start with a straight line. It could be wherever you want, just from the center to the outside. Then this is where I was talking about the bullseye, lining up your bullseye with the center, and then see how this line lines up with the line that I just drew. So it kind of is right lined up with that. Now to measure 72 degrees, I'm gonna go right here. 72 degrees is still an acute angle. So here's 70 and here's 80. So I'm gonna go to 70. And then if you actually go up here, you're gonna do 2 more degrees and make a mark. And this just happens to be on the outside, which is fine. Now what I wanna talk about is there's also a 70 over here. But if you look at this line that I created and this 70 over here, that would be an obtuse angle, and 72 degrees is not obtuse, it's acute. So if you did it over here, it would actually be measuring around 110 degrees instead of the 72 degrees that we need. So now you're gonna draw a line from the center point to the point that we drew measuring 72 degrees. So draw this line, and then I'm gonna go ahead and label it because that is important. I'm gonna just label it vanilla. You could also use a key and color code them and then color this, whatever color corresponds to vanilla in your key. Now, the part where most people will mess up, if they do mess up, is we do not line this up again right here to measure my next angle measure, because our sectors do not want to overlap. So if you notice, I'm going to turn my protractor. I'm still going to be lined up with the center, with that little bullseye is what I call it. This time I'm going to line up my protractor using the line, the other line for vanilla that I just drew. So now it's 126 degrees for chocolate. This time I do want the obtuse angle measure, so I'm not going to go to this 120 because that would be acute. I'm going to go all the way over here. So here's 120, here's 130, so 126. If you notice, there's each degree mark up here. So you're going to go to 120, 130, 125 is right here, so I'm going to go one more towards 130, and that's going to be about 126. And again, I'm going to draw a line from my center out to this point that I just made, and we're going to label that chocolate. Now this data that I did for this example, I only had 3 pieces of data. You can check whatever's left, so I can line this up here with my center and my line, and this should be about 162. And if you look from here to here, this is 160, so that's going to be pretty close. It actually looks like it's a little closer to 164, but that's going to be human error, and that's totally fine. So we had vanilla, chocolate, and then this is going to be other. Again, you could color code and make a key, but you do need to make sure somehow your sectors are labeled. Notice vanilla is the smallest sector, which was the smallest percentage and angle measure. Chocolate is in the middle, and then other is the largest, so that does just meet the checking right here. Hope that helps. And this video is going to explain how to use the printable sheet. To graph your data using the template that we've provided on our websites, we're going to just need something straight to help us measure. I actually couldn't find my ruler, so I found a scrap of paper, and I know this is straight because it was from the edge. So I'm just going to use this makeshift straight edge. This circle template is actually separated into 100 pieces for us. So if you notice, we can count by 5, 10, 15, 20, and 25. We would all get all the way back to 100. So each tick mark, from one tick mark to the next, is going to be 1 percentage. So this is actually already broken up into percents for us, so we won't have to find the angle measures of the central angle. but it is good to know how to do that if you've watched the previous parts of the video. So for vanilla, we have 20%. So just choose a random tick mark. I'm going to use one of the larger ones because that helps me count by fives. And I'm going to draw a line from the center out to the tick mark. Okay, so now if I count from here, I would have 5, 10, 15, 20. So 20% is vanilla. So from this tick mark to this tick mark is going to be 20 degrees. So I'm going to go ahead and draw my line to my center, and that is going to create the sector for vanilla. And again, you can color code this and make a key. So like if I wanted vanilla to be yellow, I could color it yellow and down here have vanilla with a little yellow square, and that would be great. I just am gonna label it because I'm not gonna take the time to do that right now. So from here, once we get vanilla, you can count from either one of these sides, but now chocolate is 35%. So I need that to be 35 tick marks. So we're gonna go 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35. So from the center out to this is going to give us, from here to here, would be 35%, and that is going to be chocolate. So we'll label that chocolate. And then what's left should be other, and we're gonna double check and make sure that it is 45%. So we have 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45. Again, in this case, using this template, you don't have to know the degree measures, but it is good to know how to do that. It is a 7th grade standard, but if you don't have a protractor, there's no way for you to measure degrees. So this works too. I hope that helps.